A Sydney home that sold for $2.1 million in early 2023 just sat on the market for 94 days and finally moved for $1.87 million. The seller took a $230,000 hit, and the agent said it wasn't even the worst result on the street that month. Now, a new round of federal land tax bracket changes is being introduced, and economists are already saying this could lock Sydney's home values in place until 2030. Not a crash, not a boom, just flat. And for a lot of homeowners and investors, flat might actually be worse. Here's what just changed and why everyone in the Sydney property market is paying close attention right now. Before we get into it, if you follow the Sydney property market, or you own, rent, or invest in Australian real estate, hit subscribe right now. We break down exactly this kind of shift, the policy changes, the data, and what it actually means for your money every single week. Hit the bell too so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's get into it.
For decades, Australian property investors operated under a land tax system where thresholds were adjusted, sometimes loosely, to account for rising land values. The assumption was always that if your property went up, your tax burden went up gradually with it. Manageable, predictable. That assumption just got reworked. The federal government, alongside state-level coordination in New South Wales, has moved toward tighter land tax bracket structures. What that means practically is that more Sydney property owners are now sitting in higher assessment bands without their actual cash income going up to match. According to analysis published in early 2024 by the Urban Development Institute of Australia, land valuations in Greater Sydney had jumped an average of 28% over the prior 2 years, but bracket thresholds hadn't kept pace. So owners got pushed into higher tax territory simply because land prices ran hot, not because they earned more or made any different financial decisions. Local property managers were already fielding calls about it. One Sydney-based buyer's agent told the Australian Financial Review that her investor clients started running the numbers in late 2023 and several of them quietly started exiting positions, not because they panicked, but because the holding costs no longer made sense. Developers are saying the same thing. The situation isn't dramatic, it's just math that stopped working in investors' favour.
Let's get specific, because this is where the story really lands. CoreLogic data from mid-2024 showed Sydney's median dwelling value sitting at approximately $1.17 million. Year-on-year growth had slowed to around 4.3%, a sharp come-down from the 15%+ swings seen in 2021 and 2022. Auction clearance rates in Greater Sydney dipped below 62% through several weeks in late 2023, which, for context, is the range where agents start getting nervous. Mortgage rates at the time were sitting above 6.5% for most standard variable loans, following the Reserve Bank of Australia's aggressive rate hiking cycle that pushed the cash rate to 4.35% by November 2023. For a $1 million loan, that's roughly $65,000 a year in interest before you even touch principal. Now layer land tax on top of that. In New South Wales, the land tax threshold for 2024 sat at $969,000. Any land value above that gets taxed at 1.6%, with a premium rate of 2% kicking in above $5.9 million. With Sydney land values where they are, a significant portion of investment properties now fall squarely in that taxable band, and that number is growing year on year as land assessments catch up to market prices. According to NSW revenue data, the number of landowners subject to land tax in the state grew by over 11% between 2021 and 2023 alone. That trend is not reversing under the new bracket structure, it's accelerating.
Here's the mechanism that economists are pointing to, and it's not complicated. When holding costs go up for investors, two things happen. First, some investors sell. That adds supply to a market already dealing with tight buyer demand. Second, the investors who stay try to pass costs on to renters through higher rents.
But there's a ceiling on what renters can absorb, and Sydney already hit that ceiling. SQM research reported vacancy rates in inner Sydney tightening below 1.5% through much of 2023, yet rental growth was also showing signs of plateauing as affordability stress pushed renters out to satellite suburbs or into shared housing. So you get a strange situation. Rents can't keep climbing fast enough to offset rising land tax. Capital growth has slowed too much to justify holding, and selling into a market where buyers are already stretched at 6.5% mortgage rates means you're not getting peak prices either. That's the stagnation trap. Values don't necessarily collapse, but they don't grow meaningfully either. Economists at AMP have flagged that real returns on Sydney residential property, after inflation, land tax, and borrowing costs, could effectively be zero or negative through to 2027 or 2028 in several postcodes. Shane Oliver, AMP's chief economist, noted in late 2023 that the combination of high rates and rising holding costs was creating a structural drag on Sydney prices that wouldn't resolve quickly. He wasn't predicting a crash, he was predicting a long, uncomfortable period of going nowhere. And that is a problem for a different set of people than most assume. It's not just investors, it's anyone who bought in 2021 or 2022 expecting to sell in 5 to 7 years and trade up. That plan just got a lot harder.
The response from the market has been uneven, but a few clear trends are showing up. Some investors have been quietly shifting capital toward Queensland and Western Australia, where land tax thresholds are higher relative to current land values and where price growth has been stronger. Brisbane and Perth both posted stronger clearance rates and higher annual price growth through 2023 and into 2024, according to CoreLogic. That capital leaving Sydney doesn't help values here. First home buyers are caught in a different bind. Government schemes like the First Home Buyer Assistance Scheme in NWS offer stamp duty relief, but land tax is a separate issue, and for buyers considering property investment as a long-term wealth strategy, the new bracket structure changes the math on what makes sense to buy and when. Developers are also adjusting. Several medium-density projects in Western Sydney paused or scaled back in late 2023, according to the Housing Industry Association, as feasibility studies stopped penciling out under higher land costs and borrowing rates. Fewer new builds means tighter supply down the track, which could eventually push prices up again, but that effect is years away from hitting the market meaningfully.
So here's where things stand right now. Sydney home values are not in freefall, but the conditions for meaningful growth, investor confidence, affordable holding costs, accessible credit, are not in place either. The new federal land tax bracket structure is one more weight added to a market already carrying a lot. The people watching this most closely are the ones who bought at the top of the last cycle and were counting on appreciation to bail them out. For them, 2030 feels like a long time to wait. Homeowners, renters, and investors across Sydney are all adjusting their expectations, not because of panic, but because the numbers have changed. And when the numbers change, the market follows. Always. If this breakdown was useful, subscribe and hit the bell. We track every shift in the Australian property market so you don't have to piece it together yourself. We'll see you in the next one.